Welcome back to another PCBH Corner. I'm David and
I'm Bridget.
And we have an exciting topic today that comes up often on listservs, and then also when people reach out to us, maybe after we post data about just some of the things that we're doing at CHCW. What is a warm handoff? That is the question.
I like that we're getting right into it.
Yeah, what is that? What is, what is a who? How would you describe that? What goes into it? Immediately, where does your mind go when we say, like, what is a warm handoff?
I think that if you look at medical literature, there's lots of different ways to a handoff and of like the meaning behind it. And really, you're involving another person into the care of the patient is the like original terms of a handoff.
And beyond that, what happens in that visit really isn't like standardized.
Right.
If you're passing off the care to another individual, handing it off to another individual, basically that defines a handoff.
Right.
Now, when we talk about it within primary care behavioral health, I think this is what gets interesting, especially when we talk about our data and different stuff, that really we often talk about what's happening after the visit a little bit more. What's happening in that visit defines what a handoff is. So when we start to have this conversation about what we define as a primary care behavioral health warm handoff at CHCW, what are the essential features of that warm handoff?
Yeah, the essential features, in the way that I was trained with the warm handoff in the PCBH model, and maybe it has taken on a life of its own.
Right.
But it was this idea that folks often don't come back for treatment. So the idea is you do it now. And so it provides on-demand access to the patient to get something done. And then also the other advantage of it was you provided support to the medical team. So it was that those two factors that really, nailed it. Was you're going to provide on-demand access and care to the patient while simultaneously supporting the medical team.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't even thought about that. What is the goal of the handoff? And as you said, for mental health and behavioral health, we know one of the worst things that happens with mental health, behavioral health, for a variety of different reasons. Long wait list, people have stigma maybe with it, people don't want to go.
Yeah, they don't follow through on the referrals.
They don't follow through on the referral. That's a big barrier. So if we could get that done that day via handoff, let's do it.
If you successfully got the handoff and went and saw the patient and provided care, that essentially is a 100% referral rate.
It's so interesting. And even some of the stuff that meaningful use and different things about completions of referrals. And it is an interesting thing. Like if you complete a handoff that day, it's 1 out of 1 for the referral too. Yeah.
And I think that brings us into the next thing that you were alluding to is like what actually happens. So a team member says, hey, the patient needs support. And we go in. This is where it's so important to provide a clinically meaningful encounter. You're doing some level of assessment and some level of intervention. You're doing something clinically meaningful because that essentially doesn't render it 100% referral rate completion. Because if you go in and you do a meet and greet and you say, hi, my name is Dr. Beachy, and they see the face or whatever, that one study I don't know if I want to really get into that. Basically, we're not sure if that's helpful or not with regards to people coming back. But my question or my point is always, why are we so worried about that person coming back? We got something meaningfully done in the psychotherapeutic literature and healthcare literature. The most common scenario is that a person's going to see a licensed person once.
Yeah, I think this is the point, and probably the biggest misunderstanding probably isn't the right word, because it's not like this has ever really been defined in a way. So wouldn't it be essentially misunderstanding? Maybe just some incongruence when people talk about handoffs. That we might have some people that it's like, oh, the point of the handoff is for me to go introduce myself, and then, as you said,
get them to come back
for a scheduled visit. Which, as you were kind of alluding to, research, is that does that actually happen or not? Who knows right now? To your point, though, it's kind of like the way we approach it is like that's irrelevant if someone comes back or not, because we're doing the visit that day. That is actually occurring. Just like if a patient was coming in for their first visit and it was scheduled, not via handoff, those two visits, a handoff and then scheduled first visit initial, would look exactly the same from the lens that we're looking at. Just one is happening with the medical provider that day, the other one happening on another day, not related to the medical provider.
And the truth of the matter is, if you are smashed in a really busy clinic and it's like a 10, 15 handoff, it might be a smidge but briefer than if you had like a scheduled initial. But really your flavor and the way you're approaching it is like you said, is going to be very, very similar, that you're meeting with this person, you're gathering some level of information and assessment, we're getting something done, the patient is leaving with a plan. That happens, like you said, whether or not it's a scheduled initial and that's the first time you're meeting with the patient, or it's in the middle of a really busy clinic during a warm handoff. And I guess I just wanted to make that point about sometimes it might be, because we have to be able to be fluid and adapting. However, you might have a scheduled patient right smack in the middle of a busy clinic and getting lots of handoff requests. So it might be a little bit faster paced. So,
and a handoff might take longer too. I mean, that's the thing.
Well, that's true.
It's like the time isn't necessarily the definition of what a handoff is or isn't. You know, it's whether the moment or whatever it might be. And as you said, you know, contextually there might be some different things going on that a handoff is like, okay, we got to get in there and we're going to make this a more efficient visit intentionally. And it could go longer as well if the need's there. So let me ask you this, because my mind's going a couple different ways that I want to ask for more clarification on. You said that the handoff within our system, the essential features of the handoff are what again?
Providing support on demand to the medical team and support on demand to the patient.
So on demand meaning immediate, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some telephone ones where you might call them, you know, later that day or in an hour or something. But I mean, it's
that's interesting. Yeah.
And I would still consider that on demand. Most commonly at this point in COVID, like where we're at with things, most commonly it's a handoff where in person.
Yeah.
Where a team member requests it and the BHC goes in within 20 minutes or less. I think we're a little bit quicker than that, but let's just say 20 minutes or less.
Okay.
That's most common.
And then, as you said, in the visit, it sounds like, as you said, there's an intentionality of gathering some context to kind of get an assessment of what's going on, and then delivering a meaningful intervention, setting meaningful goals. Where's your mind go there?
Yeah, exactly. Is that it needs to be clinically meaningful. And I really don't see a way in which you can have a clinically meaningful interaction without gathering some information from the patient and then having some idea about what we're going to then go do. And like we were saying in the beginning of the corner, is we are playing a little bit of a numbers game. So if we, okay, I think I'm a good clinician. I think you're a good clinician. I think we have a team of good clinicians. Although across the country, I think there's lots of good clinicians. But if you look at every single setting that exists, whether it's private practice, whether it's outpatient, primary care, or some other specialty clinic, the most common scenario is that someone's going to come in for one visit.
Right.
And one visit only. So my thought process is, sure, maybe we can get them to come back. Okay, great. Especially in our setting, with it being longitudinal and primary care, we're probably going to catch people in different nets throughout. But the goal is really to see people right now and provide something useful in that moment. And you're playing a numbers game. So that you're going to be able to help as many people as possible doing this. Because if I go in and give them my card, what's the chances that they come back to see me? And not to mention, as Dr. Strassel and many others will point out, sometimes the best thing about a handoff and the PCBH model in and of itself is just that the person has accepted and they're ready to get something done right now. If a person leaves, they might go home and think about it and say, you know what, maybe it's not that big of a problem. I'm not going to make a change.
That's exactly what I was thinking too, is about what Kirk always said, you know, and who knows, you know, it's not like we've done research, essentially saying the most powerful part of PCBH is the immediate on-demand access. And when you start to really break that down even behaviorally, you could see why that probably is true. If someone's in the moment needing care and help, to be able to meet them in the moment, just basically that reinforces them like, hey, we're here. Use us when you need it. You know, that.
Well, MI has a lot of research about saying, like, you know, that stage of change when they're ready.
That agency that's there. Yeah.
If you can catch them in that moment where it's like, you know, they just heard themselves say out loud that something was a problem to the PCP, and then BHC comes into the room. They might be caught in a moment where it's like,
right. This could go either way. This could go either way.
Yeah, I'm ready to work on this. I'm here ready to work on this. If you leave and it's 2-3 weeks later, maybe a month later, or wait list or whatever, that problem that was such a problem, say it like resolves, but not with a capital R resolves, it just kind of like goes into the background, then it's just not as potent.
Yeah, you juxtapose those like two different scenarios where, and again, grace and compassion for, as we're having these conversations as always. One is if you kind of do what we would define like as a meet and greet, you go in, say, here's my card, follow up with me. The other one, you actually are like, hey, we're going to do a visit day. You can imagine a patient like sitting in ambivalence, being like, man, I don't know if I want to talk about this or not. You know, I'm not really sure. And then almost immediately, in the one thing, we give them out of that ambivalence. We're not able to raise that ambivalence at all. It's like, oh, follow up, and it's like, oh, great, yeah, perfect. You know, versus what could have maybe happened if we did that visit.
Let me ask you this:
Yeah.
How many times did that exact scenario happen, where you got in with the patient and at the end of the visit they start laughing and they're like, you know, Dr. Beachy, I really didn't want to work with you again today. I really didn't want to cry, or I didn't really want to X, Y, or Z, but I'm so glad that I did. And if they would leave.
I love acknowledging that actually during visits, and particularly at the end, almost saying something like, I bet you didn't expect when you came into the doctor's office today or to see your medical provider that I was going to come in and have this moment with you. And then it usually turns into an expression of gratitude and appreciation for them engaging in the visit. Routinely, people are like, absolutely, I did not expect that this was going to happen.
They say they didn't want. I had people more than did not expect. They were just like, I didn't really want to do this.
I didn't want to do this. And then there's appreciation on their end of saying, I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that this moment did occur, which I think is really an incredible thing that really does reinforce that idea again of in the moment care. What happens when that occurs? That starts a radical ripple. The other thing I was going to ask you, and where my mind goes, is that, okay, say we all adopt this universal definition of what a handoff is. I'm not saying that we have to. We're just playing out that, hey, a handoff is in-the-moment care that actually ripples out to a visit, to meaningful clinical account of gathering context and doing some meaningful intervention or setting some goals. What are the things that people should be aware of that could be barriers to having that occur? What are some things that you've seen that get in the way of that type of handoff being lived?
Well, we couldn't possibly do a PCBH corner without mentioning the context.
We've kind of gone along a decent one into this video before mentioning context, yeah.
So we're in the state of Washington where you can have two bills going out in one day.
Within Medicaid.
Within Medicaid. We're in a state that has great Medicaid, so we're an FQHC. And so many of the patients who are coming in our setting have Medicaid, so there's no copay. And so it's, you have a lot more freedom to really try to execute that visit right here and right now. Whereas if you're in a private insurance, context or a different context, you might have to, I would actually recommend engineering things as much as you possibly can on the front end during informed consent processes with the entire clinic to kind of go over this stuff. And, but yeah, you might have to mention that these two visits are billed separately during your introduction. You might want to build something in at the front end.
I love that preventative idea that as soon as someone enrolls in the clinic, what can we do? One, to normalize the process of behavioral health and other professionals maybe coming in to complete services. And then if we can get people set up with like financial counselors or different stuff to just really prevent this ripple effect that might not be useful.
And if they did have private insurance, it would be good when people enrolled in a clinic for them to just like right then and there call and see what a copay would be for the behavioral mental health visit. So just things like that make a huge difference. And I do think our barriers to the entire field adopting what exactly a warm handoff is. And, and like you said, we're not the authority on this, but if I had a preference, I would say the WHO, the warm handoff is the execution of an on-demand visit. It was something that day wasn't,
encounter.
And I actually think that now I'm kind of possibly bastardizing the term, because I think a cold crash where you basically go in beforehand, say you're scrubbing and huddling with a PCP and the patient has long-standing whatever, there's medical necessity that's identified. And they say, hey, when the patient gets here, just go on ahead of me. And so and then I'll see them after. So then you're actually almost kind of doing the warm handoff back to them, or somebody walks in and then the front desk is able to get us, or somebody calls in with a triage. And now that we have telehealth services, you're able to provide those services right then and there. That to me is what a warm handoff is in our system.
It still has the spirit of what we're trying to get at, which, as you said, is on-demand access that is a meaningful encounter. And I really am glad that you said that, right? Because a warm handoff doesn't just need to come from the PCP. And you did a great video about the different types of warm handoffs. And, you know, it doesn't need to come from the PCP solely. It could be reception staff. A patient walks in. That happens, you know, pretty regularly, that someone will walk in. It's like, hey, can someone see this person? Someone calls in. Whatever it is, whatever that on-demand access is. And that's just kind of like a handoff from reception, a handoff from the call center.
Exactly.
That's coming through. You know, the other thing that my mind goes to about these barriers that can get in the way is, you know, we've talked about this, I think, in other corners in different ways, the importance of making sure that a handoff process is as limited amount of steps and as efficient as possible. Because if a handoff, you know, the way that we're talking is cumbersome, there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of different things, that causes people not want to do a handoff. You know, if a PCP has to think about what they have to do for a handoff and all these different steps, they're just going to write on the checkout slip, hey, follow up
yeah, schedule. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a whole, to be honest, I think that's a whole other video in and of itself, is just how to set up the processes. But I think you hit the nail on the head that it's got to be something that's really easy, where keep it simple, silly, where it's one or two steps. I was just joking, maybe it was a PCBH corner, maybe before during our conversations, that in primary care, if you have more than 3 steps of something, it's just like not going to happen. Like, you need to have like 2 steps. Like, look on the board, see who's here, and then message that person. Right. Like, that's how simple it's got to be. And the BHCs have simple steps too, right? Like, you have to respond, you're going to do this, you know, all these different things. And even things like, you know, BHCs, and we talked about this regularly in other corners, being okay running late for visits, because a handoff is going to come. Handoffs don't come sequentially. We don't know when they're coming. That's the whole, in the definition of a handoff, on-demand access, we don't know when those are. So, you know, you're probably going to be running late to other visits to make sure that you're completing these handoffs. And now we're plugging all of our videos, because we've done videos on staffing, because staffing,
it's a huge thing,
impacts how you can do a warm handoff. I was just watching Naftali's video on PCBH-ish, and he talks about if you don't have coverage, how that might look. You know, it's more of like a PCBH-ish. You're following core principles, but you're not really able to like fully do it. I'm having it pop through my brain, depending on how the acuity of your clinic is and the severity and the complexity. You know, if you're working in a really underserved, all these different things, or all these different contextual factors are coming up that are important to building a service to where you can have the successful execution of a warm handoff. But just to come full circle, just really quick, because I didn't want to forget this, you know, juxtaposing what we just went over was a warm handoff, and what we're saying is a who, with a meet and greet. I just kind of think, again, we're not the authority on this, but I think when you go in and you say hi and you give a handout or a pamphlet or your card or your website, and you smile and you say, I'd like to meet with you again, and you don't gather any information, you don't come up with a plan, I would consider that a meet and greet.
And maybe that's the point too, about what is called what. It's more about, and we were talking about this the other day, if there's articles written or data shared,
there you go.
There's more definitions given about, you know, even we've talked about this, like we should have definitions about what a visit means. You know, what are we calling a visit? You know, what are the definitions of those things? Because there's some variability.
There is variability
with what people call that. So for us, we have a definition of what a handoff is.
Right.
We've talked about that. You know, on-demand access, meaningful clinical encounter that is occurring. That's our definition. Regardless of what people's others' definition, just make sure that's known about. This is what we were defining handoffs. If that was more of a meet and greet kind of scenario, or if that was more of a meaningful clinical encounter that did a visit.
I'm so glad that you said that, because we would behoove ourselves as a field to do exactly what Dave just described. So when we post data on the listserv, I know that you always have in parentheses,
try to be very intentional
and say, i.e., this is what it is, in defining it. So that in and of itself isn't saying that somebody else is wrong, because somebody else's context might not lend them. It might be the most functional thing you can do is to do a meet and greet and give somebody your card if you're in a different context. And again, watch our other videos where we discuss, you know, Instagram versus reality, of like where you want to get to with PCBH, maybe where you currently are, and all these different things. But just define it, and then and it's always good, even in our system where we think we have a pretty well functioning, robust, to just stop and ask yourself why. Like, handoffs in and of themselves are not necessarily good nor bad. They're not better than scheduled visits or worse than. They just serve a specific purpose.
Yes.
And so you should just kind of know what is
really well said. And as we wrap up there, I love that. Always looking at, what is your context? What's the goal of your context? For us in PCBH, one of the biggest goals is on-demand access in the moment when it's requested and needed. So handoffs for us, completing a meaningful clinical encounter, that's a value congruent behavior that is getting us closer to where we want to be. So I really love that you said that. So as always, give us thoughts, questions, let us know where your minds go. But thank you for stopping by. And I love this topic. Again,
yeah, this was fun.
I
feel like I got some things clarified in my mind. Just like, define what you do because everyone's context is slightly different. And then whatever context you're in, just stop and ask yourself periodically in your program, why are we doing what we're doing? As you always say, it's not about the metrics. It's not about how many warm handoffs. It's about what the function of that is. And I think you can never ask yourself that enough in a program.
Hell yeah. Well said. Well said. Thanks for stopping by.